being a little clunky with that. Wanted to let everybody know that we are recording this event. And so it will be posted on the past seminar page in a couple of days. And I am putting that link into the chat box now. So if you are interested in watching this again or sharing it with others, you'll be able to find it at that spot. One other announcement before we get started. Wanted to promote next week's seminar, same place, same time, just next week on March 4th. We have Stephen Pasella, who is the Pacific Coastal Ecology Branch U.S. EPA Office of Research and Development, so EPA here at Hatfield. We'll be talking about observations in drivers of coastal acidification in Pacific Northwest estuaries. So I'm very excited to have him speak with us. So I'm hoping that folks can come and join us again next week if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that topic. And if you're interested in any of the Hatfield events, you can Google or use whatever platform you use to put in HMSC, scroll to the bottom of the landing page, and our calendar of events is there. But with that, I want to actually spend most of our time today with our invited speaker. So Shawn Rowe is here today to talk to us a little bit about how to use, hi Shawn, this platform that we've been using for the last year, and some of us even longer, on how to communicate with the public. And so I'm going to do a quick introduction for Shawn, and I'll hand it off to him. But for those of you that don't know, Shawn is an assistant professor with Science and Mathematics and Education at Oregon State University. He's also the Free Choice Learning Specialist with Oregon Sea Grant. And I'm gonna give a little background on him about where he got his degrees and how those changed, because I think that's really interesting. So he started with a BA in English from Georgia State University in Atlanta. He then got an MS from the Department of Multilingual, Multicultural Education in Florida State University in Tallahassee. And then he got a PhD from the Department of Education in Washington State University in St. Louis. So I like to see how those kind of things built one on top of the other as I watched his career kind of progress to where he's at now. And Shawn's focus now is free choice learning outside school settings, especially on how choice is constrained by structure and the shape of language and activity and settings. And so I'm really thrilled that Shawn is here today to share with us his knowledge on how we use this virtual platform to share with the public and with each other. And so with that, Shawn, I'm going to just hand it off to you.
Thanks, Cinnamon. Thank you all for being here. I can't see everybody, but I see a lot of screens available on my phone. We have a dual setup here because I can't see anything on my iPad except the slides. So I've got you on my phone for the video as well. As Cinnamon said, I'm going to be talking about kind of public science communication in a virtual world. I probably don't have that much to tell you about the absolute best ways to use Zoom to communicate. But what I do have is some ideas about things that we know about good communication that seem to be transferring well into online communication and virtual platforms for science communication anyway. And so some of this stuff, if any of you have seen me talk about science communication, you'll recognize some of the tips and techniques. There's some new things I've added here to talk about specifically. And really the goal of the seminar today is to help those of you who are thinking about presenting or planning on presenting at the Virtual Marine Science Day, really think about how can I best produce materials that will work together with whatever's on the web to really tell the story of my science and engage visitors with my science. As we go, I can't see the chat either, but if you have questions as we go, please put them in the chat. And Cinnamon, I kind of leave it to you. If it's something that you feel like is worth addressing right away, please just interrupt and we'll do it. I'm informal in that way. Otherwise, I've tried to save time at the end to make sure we got room for questions and answers and ideas from people.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Here you go. I want to start from this idea right here, which is that no matter what the format or the platform, science communication has this problem of decontextualization, right? It's a like cool Latinate word. And that's this basic idea that we're constantly battling with taking things out of their normal context to present them in science. Schooling's the same. when we learn math, when we learn science, when we learn biology in school, everything's taken out of the context of real phenomena in the everyday world and put into the context of textbooks, classrooms, videos, PowerPoints, large-scale ideas, theories, frameworks, which help us make sense out of them. But when we deal with people face to face, we can rely on the kind of context of speaking to create context for making meaning. And in the absence of that, we really have this problem of constant decontextualization. And as decontextualization goes up, the number of resources we have for making sense out of what we're talking about or hearing about goes down, and vice versa. When we remove an idea from its, or a phenomenon from its original context and transform it mathematically or visually for representation or communication, we run the risk of making it so decontextualized that it starts to be difficult to make sense out of it or to use it in making sense out of the world. So again, in face-to-face, we have some tools for this. Here's a good example. Marine Science Day, 2015, I believe. This is what it looks like. Face-to-face communication with scientists, with educators, with publics in contexts that are complicated and rich with objects and people and animals in many cases, and just the aura of marine science, for instance. We all feel, I think, inherently that these things make communicating about what we do more interesting and more useful because they're charismatic and they get people's attention. And far from being distractions, these places and the objects in them really are important resources for creating meaning. So at the very base, it helps people orient from leaving their everyday world and coming into your everyday world, which is the lab, which is the field, which is the mud flat, which is the research vessel, which is an office computer, whatever it is. You're bringing them into your world where you make meaning of things. You're contextualizing what you're telling them in your own world. And that's a different world from them. And all of these things they can touch and see, feel, smell, hear, contribute to their understanding of it and to their focus on it. It helps cue up ideas, it helps cue up frameworks that they can draw on to make sense out of what they're hearing from you. Even in a classroom or a seminar room, there's objects and maybe even more importantly, arrangements of furniture and basic things like that, that all serve as resources for focusing and attending to content and how to make sense out of it. So a classroom and presenting information in a classroom, you know, if you think about it, it's a really weird way to communicate, number one, because it takes everything, again, out of the complicated everyday world and puts it into this other world that's artificial, that's created specifically for the task of focusing on a particular thing and trying to understand and make meaning of it, in the absence of seeing it in its real environment or interacting with the idea in the real context of use. This is very important for teaching and learning, because when you're a learner, you can't really attend to the right things in the real context necessarily. So it's important. We rely on it. We rely on it much more heavily than we think. We rely on the fact that there are, like in this case, the images on the wall, the artwork on the wall, the whiteboards, the presentation structure, the tables, the chairs, all these things help contribute to our focusing on this as a meaning-making activity about science, about a particular kind of science, in this case, in a particular kind of context. And then we got this. Now, the problem with Zoom, and you all know this at this point, is that on the one hand, it's super decontextualized. So you're looking at, we're not in the context where I do my work. We're not in the context where I do my research. We're not in the context where I communicate science. You're in the context of my office at my house, and contexts are proliferating. So your cameras are all off, thank goodness. But if they're all on, like in the visual here, we're dealing with all of these contexts, some of which are real contexts, some of which are virtual contexts, some of which are created for teaching and learning and communicating, some of which are accidental, and each of which is impinging on everybody's ability to make meaning or shaping how they make meaning in unanticipated ways. So what do? I think our first gut instinct is to say, well, we just become better presenters. If I can just be a good, charismatic presenter, I'll be able to carry my message and my content through this lack of contextualization into this virtual world, and people will still be fascinated with it and make sense out of it. TED Talks are certainly built on this. But even in a TED Talk that you watch online, you got these huge contextual factors that are explicit that help make it a meaningful experience for you that you can use to make meaning out of what you're hearing. So there's an audience there. The speaker is speaking to an audience. It has a real interlocutor, not speaking to the void of turned off cameras in the Zoom world. The speaker's wearing a microphone, the speaker's standing in the middle, the speaker's surrounded by audio-visual resources that help contextualize what they're saying. In addition to that, when you go on a TED Talk, they do a lot of training with you ahead of time to try to make you into a better, more charismatic person for speaking and communicating, right? So this is one option, is to kind of rely on your personality and anchor things in the power of personality as opposed to the power of place and the power of objects, which we rely on in face-to-face communication. But this isn't always that easy either. And when you've been shrunk to the size I'm shrunk on your screen right now, and you're coexisting with a bunch of other people shrunk to that size, it's really hard to carry that personality. And some of us are less comfortable doing it. Add to all of this, at this point, very well-established fact that it's basically harder for human beings to remember what they hear than what they see or touch. This has been experimentally demonstrated in many, many ways. It's not that thing that you used to learn about. They used to tell us that, well, you only remember 10% of what you hear, 25% of what you repeat, and 50% of what you read. It's not quite like that. It's much more nuanced. But it is the fact that in study after study after study, auditory stimulation does not lead to memory in the same way that reading something does, writing down something does, or touching something does, or even just seeing it. So this is a great article if you're interested in that, from the University of from Iowa State University, 2014. So how do we combat that? What are the resources we have that can be relatively easily incorporated into the Zoom world, the virtual communication platform, for creating context, for recontextualizing our science, the phenomena we work with, and frankly, the content, what's interesting about our work and our lives as professionals? Well, I'm going to have several here, but the primary one I'm going to deal with first is stories. Stories and storytelling are a primary mode of communication and cognition for very good reasons. And some of you may have seen a webinar I did recently on how to create stories and how to create trust in stories. The storytelling as a phenomena is millennia old. It's one of the oldest ways we communicate and make sense of the world. It's a cultural universal. Stories are told in every place at every time by everybody. And while the structure of stories varies across cultures and over time historically, the basic characteristics of implotting things, that is taking phenomena and putting them in a sequence by time with some sort of moral point at the end, some kind of point at the end that helps you understand how the pieces fit together, completely human universal characteristic of making sense of the world. It's so basic that it goes hand in hand in a lot of work, like Jerome Bruner's work, with what we can also think of as the paradigmatic. This is what you do as a scientist every day. This is what I do as a linguist and psychologist every day. I look at the world and I try to break it up into categories that are linked together by their logic, that rely on reason, that rely on establishing truth about the world and about phenomena in the world, and correspondences of our statements to the truth of phenomena, and where we achieve some kind of explanation through analysis and argument and reduction, breaking things down into smaller and smaller categories that we then link together in logical, semantic, mathematical structures to help us make sense out of it. This is also a cultural universal. Every culture everywhere does this. It doesn't always look like what we think of as typical Western scientific method today here in the United States, but the breaking of things down into categories and then grouping them by categories in order to make sense of how things work, completely cultural universal, paradigmatic way of dealing with the world. Narrative, on the other hand, storytelling, on the other hand, is quite different. Story sequence is much more important than logic or theory in terms of how things make sense. And instead of relying on things being reasonable or valid in your arguments, it relies on plausibility. So you hear a story, even those of us who are very skeptical scientists, you hear a story in the news, and one of the first ways you make sense out of it is by judging its plausibility. Does this make sense to me? Is this the kind of thing that I can imagine a world where this makes sense? That's how you look at plausibility. And the goal of storytelling is not to establish truth, but to help people create meaning, and maybe even more importantly, personal sense, which is the meaning, the connection you have to the collective meaning that's been made. And then explanations achieved not through analysis and argument again, and not through logic, but through connection and metaphor. That is, I make connections to other ideas and to other stories and to other phenomena and to your life and to my life that help draw the whole thing together in a meaningful way. Now, if you want to use storytelling as a scientist, you don't have to just shoot in the dark at what makes a good story. We know what makes a good story. We receive from our culture these patterns that stories have to follow to be recognized. And in my earlier work, before I came to OSU, we did a lot of this work on what we called schematic narrative templates. These are narrative templates that are used by a culture broadly. And there's some basic ones that we use in science communication all the time. This is work done by a faculty at OSU, as a matter of fact. And here's three basic stories. The story of discovery, the story of rescue, and the story of mystery. Now, these are genres that we all recognize from TV we watch, movies we watch, or books we read. And we use them constantly in our everyday life to explain things to people. And they have these structures where things are not just normal, things are going along normally or starting really well or starting very poorly, and then resolving in some way through a series of adventures or misadventures, culminating in some sort of new idea or moral. The moral of the story, as you know from a fairy tale, is the point. What's the point of the story? And the point's important because it grafts together all the things that should be in the story. If the story is a mystery story about science and we're trying to understand, well, we want to understand how this particular event happened, and we have these clues. Well, if you got a mystery, you got clues. You have an initial event, you have clues, you have a scientist or a detective who looks for the clues, you have some false starts, you have some red herrings, you have some hypotheses that don't turn out, but you eventually solve the mystery. A mystery story that doesn't have a solution is not a mystery story. It's an average day in the storylines laid out here. You get the idea. We know what these story templates are. And when you want to tell a good story in the virtual world, it's almost more important than even in face-to-face communication to know when you go in, what's the story I'm telling, and what's the structure of that story, and what's the moral of the story? What's the one thing, the so what of my story that I'm trying to communicate right now that's gonna help my listener, my audience, understand which things have to be included and which things don't have to be included. Help me understand that too as I put together the story. Any questions about that? And if they come up, you can say them.
I don't have anything coming in the chat, but if folks want to put anything in, I'll take a look. The first question, Shawn, is define moral in this context.
Oh, the moral of the story being not the shoulds and oughts and ethical implications, but the point of the story. The thing about fairy tales is probably the best way to think about it. You have a fairy tale, The Little Mermaid. It's a good example. And, of course, she goes after Prince Eric. She gives up her voice to get legs. She comes to the castle. She can't say anything about who she is. She's a mystery woman. So we've got a great mystery story going here with a potential romance, potential rescue. If we bypass the Disney version and go back to the original, we have a serious problem in that because she can't communicate to the prince, he eventually turns his attentions to another woman and doesn't give her the kiss she requires before turning back into a mermaid. She loses her legs, goes back into the water, and the moral of the story is... Anybody? Oh, come on, you guys all know it. Or at least you have some sense of it. Don't be afraid to speak your mind. Don't fall for the wrong guy. Exactly. Don't trust men. We got communication is central to a good relationship. These are the morals, and the moral changes over time, of course, from the Grimm brothers to Christian Andersen to today's world, and that's why the stories change too. By the way, all our fairy tales look different now than they did 100 years ago or even 25 years ago. That's the moral. It's that so what. In a science story, you can think about the moral as the kind of why I do this work. At the end of the day, what's different about the world because I did this or because I found this out? Because then, now I have a better sense of how to solve this problem. There's your moral. And so if you've decided on that, then you have to, in terms of structuring your story, well, then there's got to be a problem. There's got to be a person who tries to solve the problem. There's got to be steps along the way to solving the problem. And each one of those things is almost a required element of the story. And listeners expect to hear all those things. So you've already created a context for them to make sense out of all the things you're going to say, because they're going to be trying to fit them into the storyline, whether you do it or not. Now, this isn't just literary theory because of my education background. There's a lot of really good research also that shows that when science stories employ these templates, these particular templates, and a handful of others, they are more memorable to listeners and readers, and they are more impactful for learners and stakeholders. By impactful, we mean people are able to create actionable items from the stories. Right. So if you're trying to get a policymaker to make a decision and do something with data, a good science story is much more likely to lead them to be able to use it to make a decision that's impactful than a regular presentation or a paradigmatic presentation of the same material. So there's one good paper on that. There's a dozen good papers on this from the last 10 years. That you can find easily starting from this one. Okay, once you've chosen your template, how do you decide what goes in it? So I like mysteries, so I'm going to try to tell my story as a mystery story to capture the attention of the audience online, because now they've got a context that doesn't rely on me being there in person, doesn't even rely on me actually being there to tell it. The context drives at least half of what goes into the story and half of what they're going to remember. This is another thing that we tell people all the time that doesn't have anything to do with virtual communication, but it turns out there's not much research yet, right, on this virtual communication. But it does turn out that less is more in education research in general. We tell people how to make signs, how to make communication documents, all kinds. In the virtual world, less is more is even more. I don't know exactly how to say it. Even less is even more. It's really hard for people to concentrate in this context on what you're saying and on the message. And so if you got several messages, like I have almost too many messages in my 45-minute talk here, but I have a captive audience in some sense, but it's really too much. You really need this one big idea. And it's related to the so what? It's related to the moral of the story you're telling. What is the one thing that you want people to know when they leave after you're done talking? Because this is what they then will hang everything else on. This is what they will remember. And in order to support that one big idea, as you weave your story, you really need no more than 2 or 3 supporting ideas or 2 or 3 supporting pieces of evidence. And in the virtual world, even more so than the real world, if you want to call it that, or the technology mediated world, that data needs to be accessible and visual. It needs to speak to people's ability to remember what they see better than remember what they hear. And so visual evidence becomes even more important in the virtual context than in the everyday context of communication, where the physical place or the physical objects carry that load for you. So how do you do that? If you haven't ever done this kind of thing, and I know a lot of you have, I've worked with a lot of you probably who are here on developing these kinds of concept maps or other visible thinking routines for your work. We don't do anything in my lab. We don't write a grant, we don't write a paper, we don't plan a curriculum without starting right here, which is a concept map that lays out what the one big idea is or concept area is, and all the things that we know are important to it, and roughly how they're related to each other. Once you've done this, it allows you to kind of visually map for yourself, well, where are the ideas that hang together and it might be an important corner of the world for me to talk about toward communicating this one idea, as opposed to communicating everything I know about this idea, because you can't. You never will be able to, unless you're a textbook writer and you get paid for that, and your textbooks are this thick. You'll never be able to communicate everything you know about that idea. And even if you do, people aren't going to read it all. So the concept map is a way of hierarchically organizing your thinking about a topic and your top of mind ideas about a topic, such that you can identify which pieces hang together easily for communication and which pieces might be more secondary or tertiary to a particular storyline. And this is important because it keeps you from then going down rabbit holes as you communicate or as you build the storyline. If you're interested in ways to do this, there's a lot of great resources online for doing concept maps. There's a lot of different kinds of visual software for doing them on your computer. I just do them on paper for the most part. I'll be glad to help you. You can always email me. I can send you good resources for doing concept maps. There's also a lot of pre-existing concept maps on science topics put out by the COSEs. We used to be a COSE. Communicated the Centers for Ocean Science Education Excellence, and they're around. We have one here, and we worked a lot on this kind of thing. There's a really great set of resources of maps people have already made, and you can pull on it and say, hey, that's my little area right there in this map. Let me pull that out and use it to structure my thinking about the storyline I'm going to tell. The one big idea and the 2 or 3 supporting ideas that I can back up with visible or visual evidence. I want to talk about that visual evidence now. Public, and a lot of you have heard me say this in different ways over the years, I'm sure. Publics want data. And maybe at the very end, we'll get to a slide that sort of explains why that is. Publics hate being talked down to, and they know when they're being talked down to. It's really astounding how good it's that BS meter people have. They can tell when you are not being sincere in communicating about your work. And it's a huge turnoff to communication. And because when you're in Zoom, when you're in virtual communication to start with, there's already all these filters and things in the way of you being a sincere, real life person. You needed to make sure that you are. So, you know, my background here helps create some sincerity. I'm at home doing this, gives you some insight into me and where I live. A virtual background can do the same thing if you choose the right one. The one that splashes OSU all over the back and makes you look like a talking head for the university. I don't want to say this in a bad way, but when you appear to be talking for an organization, you've lost all your credibility right there. You need to be talking for yourself when you communicate in this kind of context and representing what you do in a sincere way. And part of that is sharing data. Non-experts can be taught to interact with data the way you do, but they don't automatically see what you see in data or make the same meaning out of the data that you would. And so when I say accessible, I mean, you got to do some work around it to make sure it's understandable and usable by your audience. This is work we did a long time ago here at Hatfield, looking at some of this, trying to understand a little bit of this. These are 3 sea surface temperature visualizations. people, when they see the first one over there with not much on it, that's this red to purple gradient, sometimes doesn't even have the Fahrenheit bars on it. They can't tell you what it is at all. They look at the image, they say it's probably I think it was taken about a satellite, and all this white stuff is cloud cover, so it's missing data, and it's hotter some places and cooler some places. Simply by adding in the context of place, the lines for states and national boundaries, the names of cities and states and places, you overcome this one big misconception about the cloud cover. And now people say, oh, this is the ocean. This is the Pacific Northwest. This is the ocean off the coast. And it looks like it has to do with temperature of the ocean. Bang, good, great. Once you move it into some culturally familiar color schemes, they get a lot better at noticing patterns, at talking about what they see. Yeah, your context is the ocean. To the public, their context is the land. And so automatically, when you want to communicate about ocean science, you need to decontextualize their thinking from land and recontextualize it into ocean or land-ocean interface. It's just a basic first step, and we tend to forget it. Here's one that's even more scientific and therefore more complicated for people. Sorry, these visuals are just old and rough when they come to presenting, but this is chlorophyll data from satellites. All we did we did the same kind of changes. We changed the places, but even more importantly, changed the color scheme in this one again to be something more culturally relevant to people. Dark green for high productivity of ocean plants, light green to white to be low productivity. And as soon as a visitor to Hatfield sees this map and the one before it of the temperature, they can tell you things about upwelling. So the audience knows about upwelling. They know about what makes for good fishing in Oregon. They know about when you can swim in the ocean or wade in the ocean, when it's hotter or colder, when's the best time to come to the beach. They know these things from their everyday context. They can use those to make sense out of the data they're seeing, given the right recontextualization of the data. And so, again, I'm talking to you in the Zoom context, and mainly you're hearing me. You're not going to remember very well, and it's really hard to make sense out of it, partially because we're just moving on. This kind of carefully recontextualized and crafted visual can really back up the supporting idea that supports the big idea of your story. And then if it's tied together in a storyline, you're golden. Now, a lot of the data that you have doesn't look like this, or it's hard to get it in this format, or it looks more like this. And the problem with this is tables and graphs don't stand on their own. You need to also recontextualize this kind of data for people. And again, it's data. Publics want to see the data, but they really can't make sense out of the data, especially in the time frame or through the computer without sitting down with you and working on it for a while. It's hard for them to get. And so you really need to scaffold them in some ways. And this can be as simple as contextualizing it with labels and photos and images. So I show this to groups all the time, and I say, what do you see? And they say, something's declining with something else. In a seminar setting, in a classroom, you can't even read the words on the slide. So it's really hard, even for an expert, to make sense out of what they're seeing here. Contextualizing it with one big idea, the junk food hypothesis, and two or three pieces of supporting evidence, the weight of the common muir chicks, the sprat weight over time, and then a photograph which labels what these things are. Here's the muir chick, here's the sprat, in case you weren't sure. This creates a lot of context within which these data make sense or can be used to create sense by an audience member. You can do this with any kind of data, and it can be as simple as drawing a circle around which part of a graph is the important part, and then drawing out a label and explaining what you see in that. Not what it means, not what it shows, but what you as an expert see in that data and how you see it. Right? This doesn't take a lot of space, doesn't take a lot of words to do. It just takes careful consideration of the context within which you're presenting the data and the information, and how that contributes to the overall story. Questions or comments about that? This notion of recontextualizing data by building context into it.
No questions in the chat at this time.
Great, thanks. Okay, this is probably the most controversial because it used to be that when I talked about narrative, people would go, well, that's just, that's great, but that's touchy-feely, that's not science. And I think more and more we have good, really strong evidence about narrative as a way of knowing, and narrative as a way of communicating, and how it promotes memory, short-term memory, and therefore long-term memory and learning. That people are, I think they're happier with that now, understanding that. But this point still gets me in trouble with a lot of folks. When you communicate your science, it's not about giving information. And Paulo Freire was a Brazilian educator and thinker, and exiled by the military junta in the 1980s, and sent to jail, sent to Harvard for a while. I guess it's, when you're exiled, you got to go to Oslo or Harvard, I guess. But Freire, he talked about this as banking, the banking metaphor, and that when we try to communicate, most of us, our first assumption is that communication is like banking. I deposit information into empty and willing heads, and then they have built this fund of information that they can draw on, that they can withdraw to do things in the world. And despite the obvious problems with the metaphor, it's just not true. Communication is not about giving information. Good communication is not. It's really about interpreting. And what interpretation means is revealing your understanding of the world based on information. So as a scientist, you're an expert in something. You're an expert in a lot of things, potentially. And those things are not information. You have information, but what you really have is your interpretation, which is some kind of revelation you've had about that information. And what's important about that is information doesn't excite or interest anybody, right? Because we're bombarded by it constantly. Your watch is constantly giving you information. Your iPad, your phone, everything is giving you information all the time, most of which goes in one ear and out the other, in one eyeball and out the other, if you're looking at it, because it's not relevant, right? Interpretation, on the other hand, which is about my understanding of what this information means and my sharing that with you, gets audiences excited and curious and helps them want to follow up or do something. We call this provocation. We say the goal of interpretation is not education even, it's provocation. At the end of the day, I don't care if you remember what I talked about here, but I do care that I have provoked you to find out more, either as a way of debunking what I've said, fine with me, or building up your own understanding of it, even as an alternative understanding of it to mine, but provoking you to do something with it in the world. Because we also know that doing something with it, explaining it to somebody else, writing about it, thinking about it at length, looking up more information about it, doesn't matter what the source, the act of looking up things about it or noticing other sources of information about it, those are the things that guarantee you will remember it and ultimately make sense out of it and do something with it. And so think about your talk and think about your virtual presentation as really this, as really about inspiring people to be provoked to do something that either supports your interpretation or challenges your interpretation. And I'll put this metaphor, this visual metaphor up here on purpose. This wave is all that information, right? That just washes over us constantly. Interpretation breaks that down into things you should notice that are important because I've noticed it and I've had a revelation about it, an aha, a eureka. And we know those things are important in science, and they make good stories because those are the stories of discovery or the stories of mystery or the stories of rescue, how we solved a problem for these people. Finally, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions, kind of the most key factor in recontextualizing your science is establishing that you're a trustworthy storyteller. So if you're going down the line of telling stories, and there's a lot of great resources out there on how to be a good storyteller, but what most of them don't look at is trust, perceived trust. If the audience doesn't trust you as a storyteller, they won't buy into the story to start with, and they won't even invest in remembering or caring about the moral of the story, much less the parts of the story that led up to that aha. And there's three kind of parts to this. You establish trust in your story and yourself as a storyteller in kind of three ways. One is establishing a belief for your audience, or an understanding for your audience, that you are a human being with your own history, with your own values, with your own point of view, and that you're not simply the voice of an institution or an agency. Because as soon as they see you as the voice of an institution or agency, all of us who grew up, who were born after 1968, automatically distrust institutions and agencies, right? It's just the zeitgeist of the modern world, or the postmodern world. If you're true to yourself, and that comes across to your audience, they're much more likely to believe that you're being authentic, and their story is therefore trustable. And this has been established empirically. There's a paper here by Saffron et al. That I can share with people if you have a particular interest in that, that lays out some of the evidence for some of these things. The second is that the story you're telling right now is, in fact, in accord with who you are as a person and your values, that you're walking the walk, not just talking the talk, right? And this is really important, because if you're not, again, people see through it. They have these really fine-tuned meters for understanding when the wool's being pulled over their eyes. They may not understand where it's happening or why it's happening, but if a red flag goes up for us about your authenticity in your telling, or your integrity in telling me something, that's kind of it. We're automatically less likely to attend to the story. And we're more likely to start looking for all the evidence that we're right in not trusting the storyteller. And then the last, which goes along with what I just was talking about, and this one, I think we've seen this in our own work at Hatfield, is this belief that the data that you're presenting is in fact real data that you would use, that you're not just pulling data off Google to show to people to try to convince them of something, but that this represents your work and your understanding of the world, and even your data in some sense, that has been collected in accord with your values and your authentic self. Now, this may seem like asking a lot of you as a communicator to say, guys, make sure you're being true to yourself and being an authentic communicator. But in today's world where facts and information proliferate without any basis in actuality, as you know, then the perception of the storyteller is almost all there is. So are you believable? Are you trustworthy? And does what you're telling me jive with who I think you are and why you're telling me that? That's really what this is about. Ignore it at your peril. And it's almost more important, again, in the virtual. The reason I bring it up here is because in the virtual context, again, the place is gone as a contextualizer for what you're talking about. So seeing you in your lab is kind of out for people. Being in your lab and smelling what it smells like, and leaning on the tables and feeling how uncomfortable the floor is in every room in Hatfield, and understanding that you've been standing at a microscope for 8 hours at a time doing this work. Those things are implicit, but they build trust in you as a communicator, because now I've seen the place where they did this work. They're believable. It's not available in the virtual world. So you really have to pay attention to how you present yourself. I'm going to stop there so that we have time for questions and answers. I have a few other slides I can throw up potentially if they speak to things people want to know about. But my email, the website, I'm glad to field questions that way, but I'd like to take time now to spend 10, 15 minutes hearing from people about what I've provoked in you, or other strategies, things that you have learned, because all of you are now getting more or less expert at giving these kinds of communication, doing communication in virtual context. So what's working? What have you seen that's worked? What's convinced you? What's looking bad? Those kinds of things. I'll share those as well. I'm not the only expert in this room by any means.
All right, everyone, go ahead and put any of those questions into chat. We have Shawn here waiting and willing to help guide us and have discussions and be a part of this process with us. So I want to take advantage of that. So go ahead and add any of your questions you might have into that space. And so you see the chat?
I can see each other's chat there. What if you're terrible at storytelling? Nobody's terrible at storytelling because it's a cultural universal. Now, some of us are better storytellers than others, and part of, I guess, you can learn how to do it better, right? So watch a storyteller, listen to a storyteller. You do it anyway. I mean, you all watch something on television. Those are stories with storytellers and narrators. What is it that you like about them? What is it that catches your attention when you hear something from somebody? Which newscasters do you trust? Which storylines do you believe? And think about how they work. All of you are really good analysts. Turn those analytical skills to other people's stories, and that will help you build the ones you want. And then, if you're still not comfortable, just go back to basics. Build a fairy tale. Imagine telling the story of your work to a 5-year-old and use all of what Disney has taught us to do it. And you'll come up with a good story that way, guaranteed. Now they're coming fast for me to read, so maybe pick some of the next one.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the next one that I saw came in actually was Christopher, and he wanted to ask verbally. So can you unmute yourself now, Christopher? All right, you should be able to unmute yourself now, Christopher, and give it a shot.
There we go. Hi, can you hear me, Shawn? Excellent talk. I was just in the early part of your talk, and I realized you're basically contextualizing this talk about working with the public over virtual settings. What would you say in terms of how real the dichotomy is between the public and the rest of the scientific community, in the sense of, are we, with our own research papers, our grant proposals, the way we communicate together, how would you, in your own words, contextualize your story to that sort of realm of scientific communication? Because I'm an entomologist. When I'm at Hatfield, I'm a member of the public. So yeah. How do you work that out? So thanks.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that scientists are human beings too. And so one of the things we've seen in our work with visualizations, and also comes in with some of the work with narrative structures and remembering, is that those things that are good for the goose are good for the gander. So anything that makes a topic more accessible and more quickly understandable or accessible for a public does even better for scientists. So the example of contextualizing data by putting labels on it, on a table, for instance, or a graph in your PowerPoint slide for professionals, even if it just shaves nanoseconds off the time it takes one of your colleagues to understand what you're talking about, that's nanoseconds that now you have to have a more robust conversation and to build better meaning making. So these tools and these techniques work in the context of science communication between scientists as well. We tend to overlook them because we have these genres that we are required to use. But even then, if you go to a scientific if you're at a conference and you hear somebody and you see somebody presenting data, lots of times they'll put lots of data up on the slide and they'll say, but let me tell you a story, because we saw this when we went out in the field. Boom. It's just as good in those contexts of communication as it is when communicating to the public. So your jargon might go up, level might go up. You may not need to contextualize as much for other scientists, but you will have to do some. Doing it will help them make sense of it faster. And in a context where lots of people are presenting lots of information to each other, the faster that happens, the more memorable your topic is, the better you've done at communicating about your work.
So this next question builds on that a little bit, Shawn. And it was in a virtual conference like Marine Science Day is going to be. How do you have suggestions on how to be successful when there's a number of presentations and there's so much information being presented and things are a little bit overwhelming?
Yeah, less is more. So I do a workshop on lightning talks. You know, in lightning talks, you may have 30 or 40 talks in a day that you've seen. How do you, which ones rise to the surface for you? Maybe I should actually show this slide. Because I think this is, so I hope you guys can still see the slide. This can help, this is really about that. Whatever you're doing, everything you say should be relevant to your audience. So think about who that audience is. And if it's both public and professional, think about what it is you need to get done. Who is it? You can divide this audience up and speak to the ones who are most important to you right now. So if you're trying to get a job, obviously you want to speak to the more professional side of the house. If you're trying to build public support for something you're going to do out on the docks, you want to speak more to the public side of the house. But whatever you do, figure out who those people are and what they care about and shape the message so it's relevant to them. Engage them. Even in a setting like this, I started by asking you guys a question, and some of you at first nobody answered, but because I have a great wait time that I've developed over the years, eventually 6, 8, 10, 12 chat responses started to pop up. Simply asking a question engages the audience, even virtually, in a way that makes them pay attention to what you're saying and act on it, even if that act is simply typing something into their phone. And then stories we talked about here and visuals. The more you can, you create this neat narrative storylines, and it's sort of cheating because narratives also leave a whole lot of things out. So you have to acknowledge, I'm not telling you the whole story whenever I tell you any story, but it does allow you to create something that people can remember. And because we can only hold in working memory this 7 ± 2 items, that's also super well established. What you want to do is create items that are not individual ideas, but that are stories. Because I can remember 7 stories when I go home, right? Better than I can remember 25 different facts, or even 7 facts.
So I'm jumping around a little bit in the chat for questions, everyone. So if we don't get to your question, we'll try to answer it after, but hang in there with me. So this question is about, do you have any tips for encouraging your audience to trust you at the start of a virtual presentation so that you have them at the beginning?
Yes, and so I always reluctant because I always feel like it's like being a used car salesman. What are the tricks of the trade? So, but it really comes down to me. I guess maybe it's because I'm old now, but what it comes down to me is this sense of sincerity. Again, you build trust by having people feel like, perceive that you're being authentic to yourself, that you're not trying to be something you're not. I'm not here wearing a suit. I'm wearing my beaver today because if I weren't, I'd be wearing an ugly t-shirt. I am at home after all. I didn't try to hide my office, which is not the best. You heard my dog barking if you logged in earlier. I acknowledge that I'm on 2 different platforms. I didn't tell you it's because the dog, the new puppy, chewed the electrical cord off my computer, so I can't charge it now. Anything that establishes all those things we do when we meet somebody at the bar for a drink or for a cup of coffee that reestablish communication and connection. That's what you need to do. And it's just about being human and being straightforward about it. You can go overboard on that, obviously, because we also have this kind of stranger danger, right? Why are you being so nice to me? And why are you being so sincere? I'm automatically untrusting. So I think it's more about being yourself. And that usually carries the day here. And that sounds funny, but there actually is research to kind of back that up too.
All right, so Bill, you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question verbally.
Yeah. Hey, Shawn, great presentation. I'm wondering about evaluation. I mean, basically you're talking about a different delivery, and you need that formative evaluation, of course, to change, the success of your delivery. How does evaluation change with the narrative kind of approach that we have to use, that we should be using, but more importantly, how we're using it digitally?
Oh, Shawn, you are muted on my end.
There, is that better?
That is better. We see you twice now, which is fun.
There's two of me. It's me and my alter ego. It's a great question, great observation, Bill. When you give a talk face to face, one of the things that you have at your disposal is the kind of feedback of looking in people's eyes and their body posture, and you know if it's going well or poorly to a large extent based on that. And right now I can't see anybody but two of me and one of Cinnamon. So I have a hard time judging whether this is flopping like a lead balloon or actually working out well and engaging you. So as soon as you move into the digital sphere, the normal modes of evaluating both kind of informally, the visual and things like that, but also formally, I can't just hand you a form to fill out when you leave, an exit questionnaire to fill out, or have somebody ask you, drop a piece of paper in the box on your way out telling one thing you learned. And so the chat and the chat window and keeping that chat window and looking at it becomes really important. And this is where engaging the audience becomes important. So asking people to hey, put one idea in the chat, put one word in the chat that you think of right now when I say this, and then returning to that at the end. These kinds of things where people are leaving a record of their thinking, even though it's pretty surface level, give you some sense. Having people talk with each other and make sense is kind of even better, and being able to observe that's just not realistic in most webinar kind of context, obviously. Unfortunately, I don't think we have much in the way of tools for really analyzing and understanding what people are learning from virtual communication and how well it goes, unless you can follow up with them in some way or have them leave an artifact of their experience. We've been working with word clouds using Mentimeter. So having people they can text a word or a set of words to a number that we put up on the screen, and then it shows, sort of like using the clickers, but online, and it shows everybody's responses, and it'll do it as a bar graph or a word cloud or things like that. I highly encourage you to incorporate those things where you can, even if not everybody in the audience does it. It at least gives you a sense of where they are, especially if you do it at the beginning and the end, and what kinds of things are top of mind for them as a result. Yeah, we're still struggling, I think, with how to create interactivity in these contexts.
So I'm going to jump a little bit, and there's a question that I'm curious about here. That's it says, is Bill Nye a storyteller, or is he doing something else?
Bill Nye, do you watch this?
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Do you watch this ridiculous thing called The Masked Dancer? Some of you probably have, and some of you probably haven't, and some of you won't acknowledge that you have. My daughter's got us into it, and I learned from that I didn't think they knew at all who Bill Nye was, and they do. They knew exactly who he was, and even guessed that that's who he might be. So Bill Nye is this funny amalgamation because, like Alan Alda in the old PBS series that he ran, there's these storylines that they develop over the course of a show, right? But they're not the sort of one big idea story like we've been talking about. They're more these science curricular stories. But if you look at how he presents it, he doesn't usually present it narratively. It's not given to you in a series of events that build up to a point, a moral. They're presented to you as kind of discrete components of meaning, discrete elements that are then tied together by a theory or a paradigm. And they just happen to be, he's really good, and this is where museums actually are really good at creating these moments that you remember. And then it's up to you to kind of grasp together a bunch of these moments into a concept. And so I love Bill Nye personally, the sort of structure and the way of doing that. It can work really well, but it's more of a broadcast medium than it is a Zoom webinar kind of medium. So if you're looking for something that looks more like science TV or a science vlog, then story may be less important than soundbite. The key is, how do you make those sound bites link together for somebody, or help give them something to hang those sound bites on, so that it looks more like an egg tree or a concept map than just a bunch of Pokemon balls. I don't know what to do with except throw, right? Like my metaphors.
Nice. Okay, I'm trying to go back through and see if I missed any of the core questions here, Shawn. Can you see Michael Banks's question?
Michael, if I can get to the chat, I probably can find it. Oh, wow, there's a lot of stuff there in the chat.
Yeah.
Let me go back.
Michael, if you're still on the call, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and you can ask your question verbally if you'd like.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, Michael.
So,
Yeah.
Shawn, I really thank you for your talk. I learned so much. But one thing curious that I noticed you did, I don't know whether you were aware of this, but we saw your hands a lot more than your face.
Yeah.
It seems to be a little different now. I don't know if you've changed how you're presenting, but your hands were the biggest feature that you presented. I've been advised, I've been doing quite a lot of Zoom appearance with Simmer's strategic planning, and I was advised to stop doing that. And so I want to ask you whether you have evidence that favoring or promoting your hands rather than your face is more effective.
No, I think just the opposite. I have a terrible gesture problem, as you all notice, and I know that it can in fact be distracting. And so normally, and what I would recommend actually, and haven't done here because of my computer being chewed up, is it would be much better actually for you to be looking at me like this, from above a little bit, where you're focused on my face, on me, not on the lamp in my ceiling up there, which I can also see that you can see a lot. And then I actually look more normal too, rather than my hands being this big. So it's a really good observation, Michael, and it was a mistake on my part, certainly not an intentional thing. That said, for people who are second language speakers, gestures are one of the most important, more important than your facial expression. Your gestures are one of the ways they make sense out of what you're saying, because it's a visual cue that goes along with what you're saying, as long as the metaphors of your hands match the metaphors of your speaking. I had a colleague at the University of Washington who had this really funny, this was his gesture he always did when he was talking about science stuff. And I emailed him one time in the middle of a talk. I was like, what does that even mean, right? I'm getting mixed messages here. Go away, come forward. And so if you're going to use gestures, you have to really be careful about what they are. You'll notice that one of the ones I used a lot, I even caught myself doing it and tried to stop in the middle, was describing the arcs of the stories this way and the decontextualization problem this way. So literally recreating the visual you had on screen. It can work pretty well for that, but it can be overdone very quickly. And I'm an overdoer in that regard.
That was a good question as we
Thank you.
think about how we present ourselves in these visual spaces, and so that people can hear us and see who we are. Shawn, I know we've kept you a little bit late. Again, Shawn put up his email, and if you have questions, you can reach out directly to Shawn. If you have questions about Marine Science Day specifically, and the formats we're trying to accomplish there, please reach out to me, and I will try to answer those directly and help guide you with anything that I can help give you some information about what we're looking for and how we're going to move forward. But I just want to thank you so much, Shawn, for being a part of this and giving us this information and kind of helping us build some structure around what we've been doing, what we've been trying to do. So I'm really, really thankful that you were here and able to share with us.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks so many people for showing up, and I'd love to hear feedback, love to hear more ideas. I look forward to seeing what people are doing on Marine Science Day and seeing how you put these things to work.
Wonderful. So everybody online, thank you so much again. If you have questions, please follow up with us. Hope to see you again next week. And Marine Science Day on April 10th. So hope to see you there. So thanks everyone. And Shawn, thank you so very, very much for your time.
Thanks. Hopefully I'll see you all sometime soon.
All right. Thanks everyone. I'm going to end the presentation now. Shawn, you're getting lots of thank yous in the chat, which I think you can see.
Really appreciate that. That way I know you're all still here talking, not drinking coffee off somewhere.
Everybody's still there. So all right, everybody, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Have fun with your new puppy, Shawn. We'll talk to everybody later.
Yeah. Bye-bye.